For 3,000 years, the story has persisted like a shadow at the edge of history, a monstrous creature half man, half bull. A palace so complex that it trapped those who entered. A king who demanded tribute of youths and maidens from foreign cities, the Labyrinth, Knossos, the Minotaur. Most accounts reduce this to myth, a moral tale, a symbol of power and monstrosity, a story shaped by poets and political myth-makers. Yet, every generation returns to the question with fresh tools. What if the myth is the echo of a real place? What if beneath the soil of Crete lie corridors and chambers whose scale and secrecy seeded the story we now call the Minotaur? This is the story of one modern expedition, part archaeology, part detective work, that followed rumors, dust-modeled manuscripts, and the geography of myth until a place that could be called Labyrinth began to emerge from the rock. Dr. Marapapis learned Greek myths as a child, then left them behind for stratigraphy and field work. 20 years later, she returned to the Mediterranean with a new obsession: Knossos, the Bronze Age palace complex excavated by Sir Arthur Evans in the early 20th century. Evans reconstructed a palace and coined the Minotaur name after Minos, the legendary king. His reconstructions were ambitious, controversial, sometimes accused of putting the story into the stones rather than reading the stones for themselves. Mara was not interested in Evans's museum. She wanted to find the hidden plumbing, the late walls, the places Evans could not explain, and she had read about references, obscure, fragmentary, in Byzantine texts and later travelers' notes claiming tunnels under the hill that led deeper than any known vault. Funding was scarce. The mainstream journals preferred papers about ceramics and palace economies. But a small independent foundation that prized risky questions gave her a grant. She assembled a team, a geophysicist, a linguist, to junior archaeologists, a local guide, and a documentary filmmaker who insisted he would film history meeting myth. To understand the Labyrinth story, you must accept one fact: Evans rebuilt as much as he excavated. He imagined a palace of courts, storerooms, processional routes, and frescoed halls. He placed a labyrinth in label on the palace because of its complexity, narrow corridors, multiple levels, odd overlapping rooms. But his work excavated only parts. Much of the Bronze Age ground has been disturbed, rebuilt, looted, and reused through millennia. That leaves gaps. Mara's team began by rereading Evans's notebooks, the unglossed pages. There were sketches Evans never published, a blocked stairway here, a soot-black niche there, oddities he annotated as unknown later period. The linguist, Lena, found marginal notes in an Ottoman tax register referencing a deep vaulted place used for storing wine. The geophysicist, Omar, proposed a non-invasive survey of the eastern slope where Evans had stopped digging. They wanted to avoid the trap of wishful reading. Their methods would be measured: ground-penetrating radar, magnetometry, micro-drilling cores, and a careful review of ancient literary sources in the original languages so mythic metaphor would not be mistaken for topography. Radar returned shapes, not ruined houses, but long, repeating corridors and wide voids that suggest architectural planning. Magnetometer readings showed linear anomalies consistent with mortar and ancient walls. The pattern extended beyond the palace perimeter, angling down the slope as if a deliberate network reached out from the heart of Knossos. At first, the team called them subterranean galleries. The villagers used a different term, labyrinthos, the old Cretan word, surviving among fishermen and shepherds as a folk name for any complex underground system. Microcores pulled up pottery fragments buried in layers contemporary with the palace's late period. Fine storage jars, a shard painted with a bull motif. The stratigraphy matched a date range around the late Bronze Age, the supposed heyday of the Minos kings. Evans's palace, it seemed, extended below the visible floors, passages that might have been intentionally sealed or gradually silted. But were they the stuff of myth? Or were they mundane storerooms and drainage tunnels exaggerated with time? Mara reminded the team, a labyrinth need not be a maze in the modern sense. It could be a complex subterranean infrastructure built to regulate water, store surplus, host rituals, or control movement. A place to contain, to shelter, or to isolate. 2 weeks into excavation, the team cleared a north-facing shaft uncovered by their survey. It led down to a vaulted corridor, low but wide, with walls of unusually smooth ashlar blocks. The corridor curved left and then right, forming a spiral of sorts, and at intervals the masonry bore niches, shallow alcoves, each charred at the back, suggesting lamps burned there. Lena found inscriptions in a script not fully decipherable, looped linear marks alongside repeated symbols showing 3 vertical strokes and a curling bull horn. They were not linear of the still undeciphered Bronze Age script, nor pure pictograms. They seemed to be a local shorthand, perhaps ritual graffiti, names of rooms, or instructions. The corridor opened into anterooms and then a larger chamber. Fresco fragments clung to the plaster, pigments of cinnabar and ultramarine. Enough remained of one scene to show a procession, a bull, masked human figure, attendants carrying offerings. It was the sort of imagery that feeds myth, not proof of monsters, but proof of ritual. They also found something else, human bones moved and reburied, with cut marks that suggested secondary burial rituals rather than violence. The bones were mixed with animal remains, cattle skulls placed deliberately with the human bones. So this place had been used in ritual contexts and burial rites, perhaps over multiple centuries. Mara recorded, cautiously, "This seems less like a prison for a beast and more like a sanctuary complex, a controlled ritual environment in which bulls and humans intersect." But the public, once clips of the procession fresco leaked, began calling it the Labyrinth. News travels differently now, social media filled with breathless claims. A Twitter thread suggested the corridor network formed an actual maze and that the bull fresco proved the Minotaur was real. A blogger repurposed ancient myths into a blockbuster script. These are not rituals. They are the walls of the monstrous lair. Mara fought the narrative, but she also understood why people wanted the myth real. Evans himself had been seduced by the romance. The excavators before her had excavated stories as much as stones. The human impulse to shape evidence into story is ancient. Her job was to separate narrative hunger from evidence. Omar's scans showed purpose, large cisterns, channels, and sluices integrated into corridors. The palace's architects had engineered hydraulic control on an industrial scale. Water management in Crete was a matter of survival. The so-called maze had functional rationales: defense, privacy, ritual choreography, and climate control. But functionality does not deny symbolism. Minoans used architecture to choreograph social and ritual experiences. A spiraling corridor can control the movement of people, guiding them toward a climax of revelation. Mara convened a symposium in a tent adjacent to the trench. The question, how to present the findings without mythic inflation, but without stripping meaning from the past. Some colleagues argued for restraint. "This is a storage and ritual complex," said Professor Argyros, a conservative Cretan archaeologist. "Call it what it is. Don't feed the monster narrative." Others were more speculative. "Imagine initiation rites," said Cora, their ritual specialist. Young initiates led through the corridors, encountering staged spectacles, flickering lamps in niches, brief interludes where attendants perform, culminating in an antechamber where a masked figure embodies something beyond human, a bull, a deity, a totem. That is where the Minotaur image could be born, not a literal beast, but a ritual role played by a human behind a bull mask. Mara sided with neither extreme. The evidence sustained both the mundane and the mythic. The corridors were engineered. The frescoes suggested bull cult practices. The niches implied staged events. It was plausible. The palace's subterranean program produced the Minotaur narrative when filtered through centuries of story and political propaganda. On day 47, a junior member of the team, Elias, followed a narrow slit beyond a blocked arch. He squeezed through and found a chamber sealed with a heavy stone slab. Inside lay an object they did not expect. A wooden mask, scorched but intact, carved with stylized bull horns and painted traces of red and white. It was human-sized, too heavy to be a toy. Radiocarbon dating placed the wood in the late Bronze Age. The mask was not decorative. Straps and wear marks suggested it had been worn, perhaps in a raid. Nearby lay sled runners and a harness, equipment for moving heavy objects. It suggested the mask could have been worn during processional spectacles or used as part of a performance. The find changed the debate. The mask was not a monster. It was a crafted object, a human attempt to take on the bull's visage. Whether that equates to a minotaur depends on the interpretive step we allow. Mara described it in her notes as a human mask of the bull, an actor embodying bovine power. It offered the most plausible explanation for the myth, a ritual performance so striking that later storytellers transformed performer into monster in their retelling. Archaeology is never neutral. Knossos sits on public land, on a living island with a tourism economy fed by myths. Local politicians who benefited from the Minotaur brand pushed for headline formulations. Funding bodies saw documentary returns. Mara resisted sensationalist framing, but she also negotiated. The museum could exhibit the mask if contextualized, if explanatory plaques showed how ritual performance becomes myth. Remote sensing data and direct finds were published in peer journals, but the documentary filmmakers' footage, intimate, cinematic, swarmed into the public sphere. People watched the mask reveal and heard narrators speak of the Minotaur born in the bowels of the palace. The public wanted closure, the press wanted a story. Mara realized she could not stop myth from regrowing around fact. Her task became curatorial. How to let the public feel the wonder while preserving interpretive caution. Local oral histories added texture. Old women remembered tales from their grandparents about the hidden steps and voices under the stone. A shepherd recounted how his grandfather once found a sealed door that smelt of incense. An old mason showed the team a fragment of fresco he had kept from a ruined chapel showing a man dancing with a bull staff. These stories confirmed continuity. The palace's subterranean features have been noticed, avoided, built over, mythologized, rewritten in Christian and Ottoman registers. The Minotaur legend may have acquired new coats of paint, but is anchored in the island's embodied memory. A few months after the mask find, a young graduate student published a paper that would shift the debate. She argued the mask and corridors represented an institutionalized ritual performance, an aegis rite in which the king's enthronement involved a ceremonial assumption of bovine power. The rite used subterranean processional routes to stage initiation, privacy, and transformation. Her bold conclusion: the Minotaur myth is a compressed, stylized memory of public ritual where human agents enacted sacred roles. Over centuries, political storytelling and foreign observers simplified and sensationalized the event into a monster. Mara, in public lectures that followed, called this model the performative hypothesis. It neither denies mythic force nor invents literal beasts. Instead, it shows how human bodies, masks, architectural choreography, and social memory can be the raw materials for myth. Not all accepted this account. Alternative theories flourished. Some proposed natural caves below Knossos filled with labyrinthine snake tunnels inhabited by wild bulls, proposing the Minotaur was a real animal kept for sacrifice. Others floated pseudo-archaeological ideas, the labyrinth as a stolen technology from a lost civilization, or even the involvement of refugees from the Near East bringing monstrous practices. Mara dealt with such claims by returning to data: the mask, the ritual assemblage, the waterworks, the sealed burial contexts. She published detailed stratigraphies and careful translations. The evidence best fit a social performance model with ritual slaughter and structured funerary practice. Not a literal monster, not a giant maze trapping victims, but an architectural stage that could produce and anchor a mythical narrative. The story of the Labyrinth is still a conversation between the past and the present. For Cretans who sell olive oil and host tourists, it is both cultural capital and living heritage. For scholars, it is a test case about method, how to read architecture as ritual choreography, how to trace the evolution of myth from performance to legend. Mara walked the corridors months after excavation, mask displayed in a climate booth behind glass. She thought about the people who once moved through the stones: artisans, priests, initiates, rulers, families. She imagined the lamps glowing in niches, the hush of a procession, the sudden reveal of a masked figure, the breathless awe of onlookers who then carried the image into poems and stories. Was the labyrinth found? In a sense, yes. A network of subterranean corridors, ritual chambers, a bull mask, human bones in ritual context. All pieces fit together into a credible reconstructive narrative. In another sense, the labyrinth remains partly unfindable. The myth's symbolic potency, the Minotaur as a psychological and literary figure, survives beyond the stones and will not be reduced to a single archaeological fact. Mara's final narration in the documentary summed it up. We found the architecture that could produce a labyrinth, the artifacts that could make the Minotaur real as a ritual figure, and the memories that transformed performance into monster. The palace did not hide a beast. It hid a story so powerful it became a monster. The mask rests in a museum case. Children press their faces to the glass and whisper about monsters. Scholars argue in journals. Tourists walk the reconstructed courts and buy postcards with ghoul heads smiling back at them. Archaeology had not solved the myth in the way news feeds declared, but it had enriched it, returning a living complexity to the story. That, Mara realized, was a different kind of discovery, not the final answer, but a deeper understanding of how humans make myths. Through architecture, blood, performance, and the slow pressure of time. When she left Crete months later, the wind off the palace stirred a ridge of dust. She imagined the masked initiates, the lit niches, the steady rhythm of feet in passageways. Somewhere under the hill, the stones remembered their actions and the story. The labyrinth continued, not only beneath the earth, but in every telling.